Well, let's turn to our third topic, international news. Life in Cuba has gotten a lot tougher. The power grid collapsed for a fourth time. Hurricane blew through, killing 7 people, and the government has to choose daily whether to import fuel or import food. People there are saying they're standing in line for everything. And Michael, who or what could help this situation?
Well, for me, I mean, the Cuba question is much more complicated than some want to admit, particularly expatriates in Miami. It has multi-layers of complexities attached to it, right? I think about Obama when he took them off the sponsored terrorism list in 2015. I think about how Trump put them back on the sponsored terrorism list in 2021. I would say, though, inside of those complexities, there is this common strand of agreement to some degree that the energy grid needs attention and it needs it now, right? Cuba's power grid is so fragile due to a combination of factors, a lack of investment in infrastructure of all kinds, not just the power grid, lack of access to fuel to run the power plants, and limited access to the global markets are some of the factors, right? The current president of Cuba must at some point, he has to sit down in good faith, without hubris, and ask for help from the international community, right? Until he does that, these blackouts are going to continue with or without natural disasters attached.
The concern about that, the international community, and historically, that's where the problem lies. 90 miles offshore of Florida, they have relied on the previous Soviet Union and Venezuela, which is why they were, part of the reason why they were put on the list way back in the 60s, 50s. Clinton signed it, so it's not even like a Republican-Democrat kind of thing. It is their military shot down 2 planes off of the coast of Florida, and that's what led Clinton to signing the embargo even stronger than what was already in place.
You know, I think there are a couple lessons here thinking about that energy grid, which is that we need more resilience across all energy grids. I mean, we saw what happened with Texas. In the US, there's actually 3 electric grids. There's the Eastern Interconnect, the Western Interconnect, and Texas. And that's why with the winter storm, Texas actually couldn't get power from other power plants elsewhere in the United States a few years ago. Cuba has suffered because they were relying on one power plant, a few were under maintenance, that one went down. But there's another lesson from Cuba, which is that all their power is reliant on the importation of fossil fuels of oil. They're running thermoelectric power plants which are powered by oil, and that is not a resilient strategy, because if you lose that fuel coming in and you don't bring in enough fuel, I mean, they have rolling blackouts all the time because they can't import enough fuel. It's 2024. We need an updated electric grid. But from the U.S. perspective, normalizing relations with Cuba and having a vibrant, functioning economy 90 miles from Florida would be in everybody's best interest here. The challenge is, how do you get there geopolitically, right, to the thing that everyone, bipartisan, seems to want, right?
What about solar?
Solar and wind are more decentralized, right? And that actually provides a benefit on the grid so that you're not risking everything shutting down for one issue. Now, of course, they're intermittent, so you have to have energy storage systems. The point being, we know what good, functioning, smart grids look like right now, and Cuba certainly isn't one, but we should also look at how our grids are functioning in the U.S. too.
Lisa, what about the trade embargo? I think the Cuban government says it's all the United States' fault because of this trade embargo. Should we lift that?
Well, I mean, the Biden administration lifted some of the sanctions on, not on state actors, but on private actors, banks and things like this, just this year. I think not. I mean, Cuba has to, the people are the victims of their government, which is so often the case around the world. And the United States, hasn't fully rebuilt the grid in Puerto Rico, which are our citizens. So, there is such a thing as, and it's difficult to think about, but there are such thing as geopolitical allies and, enemies. And there is a limit on what the United States can do, particularly with regard to a country like Cuba.
Michael, would you want to see some change? Nothing's going to happen before the election,
I think
for
we
sure.
need to, at some point, address the master narrative about Cuba, because there's still people that have Fidel Castro running around there. There are a lot of people in Cuba that want to sit down in good faith with lots of people all around the world, but the master narrative prevents them from getting sort of popular support to some degree. So I think the narrative has to shift on Cuba in the modern world, because again, you go to Miami, you still see people, Fidel, Fidel, Fidel. Not exactly so much.
And that, with this, paired with the fact that the president's last name is also that same last name, and he's the Communist Party. Like, it's literally called the Communist Party. So there's that concern that you're going to align yourself with somebody that, like Russia, that is invading another country as we speak.
Sure, but we have much better relationships with Vietnam, which is still run by communists, right? I mean, it's just picking on the sort of Cold War era. I realize it's complicated to normalize relations, but I think it's a bit hypocritical right now if the U.S. says, well, we can't normalize relationships with Cuba because they're communists, and look at what we're doing in the rest of the world with plenty of people who are pretty suspect in how they're running their countries.
Lisa, is there any public will to help Cuba?
I mean, I don't think in this current climate, I mean, the whole narrative of this election is that we're not doing enough for, for our own people, and it's a very national, half the country, very nationalistic view.
Yeah, and just real quick, because we did normalize back in 2017 with Obama, and we had an embassy there where our intelligence units and people there, their families, and they were getting sick by a mysterious illness, and we had to withdraw.